Good afternoon. It is Wednesday, April the 6th. Welcome to the Criminal Justice Committee. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Representatives Beck, Campbell, Dixie, Doggett, Farmer, Griffey, Hardaway, Hawk, Howell, Halsey, Lamberth, Moody, Russell, Sherrill, Vice Chairman Sexton, Chairman Curcio. Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Members, we have a full agenda today, but before we get started, does anyone have any personal orders? Seeing none. I want to thank everybody for coming. As a reminder, if you are here on a bill, we are not going to take up bills in this committee until at least 4:30. It may be a little bit past that, just depending on how the hearing goes. But just in case you're here on a bill that is calendared, we will get to our calendar, but we're not getting to it for at least an hour. So, members, our first order of business is a hearing on hemp-based cannabinoids. This has become, every year we have several pieces of legislation dealing with various aspects of not only Delta 8, Delta 9, hemp, cannabis, marijuana. The bills run the gambit. I always find it laughable when a constituent of mine says, what do you think about, quote, that marijuana bill? And I'll say, which of the 50 are you talking about? But this year specifically, we have a public policy debate in Tennessee going on about Delta 8 or other hemp-based cannabinoids. We had a bill that came out of subcommittee that would seek to treat Delta 8 cannabinoids the same way that Delta 9 cannabinoids are treated, to peg them at the same level. That's certainly a debate that's worth having. We're also having a debate about, what is otherwise now legal Delta 8 cannabinoids. Should they instead be properly labeled and packaged and measured and so on and so forth? So what we want to do today is we want to hear from members of law enforcement. We're going to hear from members of the industry. We're going to hear from some district attorneys to talk about the issue generally. We don't have a bill in front of us today. We won't be taking a vote today. We're not going to be coming to any conclusions today. But this is sort of our own mini summer study, if you will. We want to hear from all of you who are subject matter experts in your own corner of this discussion. And then we're going to convene. We'll go through the rest of our calendar and we'll recess. And then we're going to revisit all of the bills dealing with cannabis in 2 weeks, which will be on April the 20th, our regularly scheduled meeting for that Wednesday. And so it is our hope that we will be able to come up with some resolutions or some way forward on not only the bill that brought us here today, but the other bills that will also be calendared on that cannabis calendar. Hopefully that'll give us the time that we need to make some informed decisions about which way to go. So without further delay, we do have a full agenda of folks who have signed up to testify. And first on our list, first of all, we will need to go out of session. So we're out of session. And first on my list, I have the Department of Safety. Assuming Elizabeth Stroker is here to testify for the Department of Safety. Ma'am, if you could please come forward. Oh, welcome. Come on down. You guys know the drill. You can stand at the podium or you can sit at the table. Please turn on your microphone, state your name for the record, and then share with this committee whatever you'd like. We're going to follow the same format as we do typically in committee, so I'm going to give you guys 4 minutes, and then there'll be unlimited time for question and answer, but we just want to be able to structure that. So without further delay, you're recognized.
Elizabeth Stroker, Legislative Director for the Department of Safety. Y'all want to hear from the big gun, so here's the Colonel, and he's going to do all the talking for us now.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, Committee. I'm Matt Perry, Colonel, Tennessee Highway Patrol. So I think you hear me and us coming here, and our biggest concern is traffic safety. The people driving around the state of Tennessee, for the most part, is our primary function. So we're always concerned about drugs, impairment, even alcohol impairment. And so we're concerned about this, which, I think maybe we have some, I can't speak to all the science of it. I know it is very similar to marijuana and all drugs related. Our concern is that there's a kind of a wide array of how they're handled and regulated right now. We feel the effects are very similar to what is currently illegal in the state of Tennessee, Delta 9, THC. We feel Delta 8 is very similar, causes some of the same effects, and our biggest concern is crashes and, like I said, traffic safety. Typically we have around, 2,500 crashes a year involving drug impairment. I don't have that broke down into every kind of drug. Sometimes we don't know that. We just know there's drugs based on what they've admitted to and drug results. Fatal crashes, we typically have about 300 a year that are a result of drug impairment. So I'll stop there for a minute and let anybody ask questions.
And just to follow up on what he said, we have done a little bit of research based on surrounding states, what they have done, how they handle the Delta 8, Delta 10 debate. We've kind of seen what they've done in the past, what the issue is for them in the future. So we're prepared to answer any of that. Really just wanted to keep it brief and open it up for any questions that you all have.
Thank you very much, Colonel and Ms. Stroger, for being here. I do have a list. First, I have Representative Dixie. You're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Stroker, could you elaborate on what some of the other states are doing around, and what was the problem, what they're doing, what they have been doing, what they're doing now, and if there's any issues that are arising?
Ma'am, you're recognized.
Always want to make sure. What we've seen is there's kind of a hodgepodge of what all the states are doing. In some states, this isn't an issue simply because they don't have the distinction like Tennessee does, to where Delta 9 is the specific compound or derivative in the code. Some other states have it to where it's just any THC is either regulated, allowed, not allowed, and it's all treated the same. Some states are similar to us, where they only regulated Delta 9 because of the Farm Bill. And others are in the process of starting to regulate that Delta 8, Delta 10, because they've found kind of these problems and concerns popping up as well. And so we've seen kind of a little bit of everywhere. And the ones we are following are the ones around us who are also trying to put some type of regulation in and make sure that we don't have any type of fatalities, accidents, so people know what they're taking and know how harmful it can be to them. But it depends on the state, and we broke it down. I'd be more than happy to share that list with everybody. I just don't want to go through all 50 and waste y'all's time.
No.
You're recognized.
Thank you. If you share that with me, that would be great. I was just wondering if there are any specific things any problems that rose to the top that you would say, hey, this is something that we need to consider if we move forward with this.
Yeah, and I would say, yes, we've seen, and you'll hear more so from TBI, who are really the drug experts. What we've seen is that right now it's just unregulated. There's no regulation, age, caps, dosages, anything. What it looks like, labeling, all of it. And that's where we're seeing the issue. And not just from the law enforcement perspective, it's similar to what we've testified on in the past, is the people don't know who are getting it what they're in for. They don't know what's going to happen. They don't know the effects that are going to impede them or impair them. They don't know they shouldn't be driving. And so that's where we're coming from, is we want, if it is the will that this be, legalized in whatever will, form, or way it may be, that there be a lot of thought, regulations, consideration, so that we don't get into a situation where we're increasing our fatalities. And it may just be because the people don't know who are taking the substances.
Representative Dixie.
No more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next on my list, I have Leader Lamberth. You're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. And Chairman, thank you for setting aside a significant amount of your committee's time for this important subject. I know we, in the subcommittee, and this was no reflection on the subcommittee chairman at all, he did the best he could to allow folks to be heard, but this is a setting where I know we can slow down and take our time with this, and that's a really good thing. So I just want to ask really kind of one question on the fatalities that you've seen in other states that have either legalized marijuana or allowed for higher level THC products that may not be Delta 9 but other Deltas. As there has been more of an availability of those substances on the market, what has happened to their fatality numbers in crashes involving intoxication on drugs? Have they gone up? Have they gone down? Have they stayed stagnant? What has happened in those states?
Colonel, you're recognized.
Thank you. Thanks, Leader. Yes, they've gone up. Now, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'm a part of a group with all the states' colonels, and so I've asked specifically the ones that have legalized it. More have. They do see an increase in fatal crashes, and they call an increase in crime. They are making more drug arrests and more DUI stops for impairment.
Leader Lamberth.
Have there been any best practices in some of those states to try to, as you've said, look, if this product is going to be on the market, Are there any kind of best practices or good regulations that other states have been able to put in that have been able to keep those numbers under control? I don't think any of us, anybody in the industry on this panel, wants to see more fatalities or intoxicated drivers. So are there any practices that you've seen in other states that have worked to keep those numbers down?
Colonel, you recognized.
Thank you. There are that regulation, consistency that Director Stroker spoke of that. 8 and 10 are legal, 9 is not. You can buy it at a gas station. I think some of y'all have seen it. I certainly have. It's on the counter at most gas stations. To Director's point, anybody can take it. Any 18-year-old can get it, take it. They don't know what they're taking. It's on the counter, so they think, well, I can take it. I can take it right now and I go out to my car, take it, drive down the street. So there's a whole lot of education and a whole lot of regulation that, and I think this is a great venue to sort of us figure this out.
And just to add on to that, we pulled some numbers last week that were requested of us from one of the senators on specifically what you're asking about. And from 2017 to 2022, we've had 545 fatalities where marijuana was involved. We obviously can't decide that down further, whether it was hemp or Delta 8, 9, 10, but without going through all those records. But just to show that it is a problem and we just don't want to make it worse. And so regulation to make sure that people know what they're getting and that the wrong people aren't getting these.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Next on my list, I have Chairman Doggett. You recognized?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just have a couple brief questions. Have you seen any increases in DUIs or driving while impaired in those between the ages of 18 and 21 that were not alcohol-based, but were more along the lines of what we're discussing today?
Yeah,
Colonel, you recognized?
Thank you. That's a great question. I actually don't have the numbers in front of me. We can get those. The seeing, so I've talked before, our citations, traffic stops, DUIs, they're all down a little bit because of COVID and the way we responded to it. So our numbers for the last couple of years when it comes to enforcement probably aren't a good baseline for where we probably are today and where we're going to be. So I'll work on getting those numbers and we'll get them to you in the committee.
And
there'll be a little bit probably under.
And to
Mr.
add
Stroker, you
on,
recognized?
sorry, to add on to what Colonel has kind of said in other committees, what we have seen is the drug DUIs have been rising as opposed to the alcohol DUIs. And so that's really kind of, again, that's not just marijuana, that's any drug DUIs is really what's going up and the alcohol's coming down. And so we just don't want to add to that increase.
Chairman Doggett?
Thank you. How would, right now, if you could explain to us, how would troopers, for instance, be able to identify if someone that they came in contact with was impaired by some of these cannabinoids that we're seeing out there on store shelves today?
Colonel, you recognized?
Thank you, Chairman. It's not. We have drug recognition expert troopers. We have 110 or so in the state, and we're working on more. Those are the troopers, and there's officers across the state as well, beyond troopers, that are trained to look further and really identify and narrow down to stimulants and depressants and some of the different hallucinogens, different drugs. But your average trooper, police officer, we do field sobriety tests. That they will determine impairment. It's not just alcohol. That's kind of a misconception. Being able to do those divided attention tests help determine whether somebody's on drugs. Whether somebody's impaired. That may be by drugs, that may be by alcohol, but your average trooper officer can't determine whether it's Delta 8, marijuana, cocaine, potentially.
Chairman Doggett?
But they would be able to determine based off of their training and through the types of field sobriety testing that they would do, that they would be able to identify that this is, at least there is some impairment due to cannabinoids at some point, maybe through like a convergence test that would show that, but.
Yes, sir. There are some tests. They can certainly tell whether somebody's impaired. There are certain things that all troopers have had that ARIDE. It's kind of a precursor school for advanced roadside impaired driving. It's a precursor to DRE, so every trooper's had that. They'll look at certain, there's a few things they go above and beyond field sobriety, like lack of convergence, and some other things, even just opening your mouth and seeing green on the back of the throat, that, you know, on the back of your tongue. Those are things, but not every trooper's had that. But every trooper's trained to look for impairment.
Chairman Doggett.
Thank you very much. I know that, you know, most law enforcement officers are only have the standard field sobriety testing. The ARIDE for all substances and abuses is very, very important. I'm proud to see that Highway Patrol is doing that before they even come out of the academy. Every trooper is ARIDE certified when they hit the road day one. So that's very encouraging. So thank you very much for your time, for what you do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Next on my list, I have Chairman Farmer. You recognized?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee. And I want to say thank you all for being here. Appreciate what you do. There was questions earlier with regards to fatalities that involve drugs and impairment. And I do agree. I think I've seen, just in practice, I've seen more people coming in and needing representation with regards to pills. You know, the pill epidemic is something, opioids especially, it's something that's hit us hard here in Tennessee especially. Do we have the numbers on accidents that are solely, that the only drug that was tested with an individual with regards to a fatality involved cannabis? Do we have any stats on how many fatal accidents where the only illegal drug in that individual who passed was cannabis?
Ms. Stroker, you recognized?
Yes, and that's the number that I just referenced. Let me pull it back up again. It's in the 500s from 2017 to 2022. It's where there was no alcohol involved, and it was the marijuana-related fatality. Okay. I can get that exact one, but it's in the 500s. Let me pull it back up, though. Okay.
And my question is very specific. So no alcohol, you said marijuana-related, but it's solely and directly marijuana only. So no opioids, no nothing else, only marijuana or opioid related.
545 is the number. It's my understanding, because that's how I requested that Titan pool, the numbers, that it would only be marijuana related. So that's my understanding, yes, but I want to triple check to make sure that it doesn't mean there may not have been some other drug in there. So I want to triple check that. But that is my understanding of what that number is, but I also want to make 100% sure. I'll ask the person who pulled it right now.
Okay, Mr. Chair.
Chairman Farmer.
And that's from 2017 to current?
Yes, sir. We pulled these numbers last week.
Okay.
And those are,
yes, Colonel, you recognized?
Sorry. Those are also what is reported. That's what we know was marijuana related. Right. That doesn't mean there aren't others. There are fatal crashes where we don't know whether blood wasn't taken, single vehicle crashes. We attempt and try, but not in every fatal crash. And obviously there are times where we can't get blood, and so we don't know what level of impairment, if there was or was not any.
One more question, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much to either one of you. Now, are we aware of any fatalities that's been directly related to the Delta 8? Is there a way to discern that? I don't know if you all have a way to test that or not, or are you aware of any fatalities that's just directly related to Delta 8?
Thank you. I'm not aware of any. I'm sure TBI probably can speak to some of that, the science to it, and whether you can differentiate between.
Okay, thank you.
Based on a normal blood test.
Thank you, Chairman Farmer. Next on my list, I have Chairman Halsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And maybe I should wait for TBI. That was my question on a fatality. You have a blood draw, and you send it to TBI Crime Lab. Do they differentiate between Delta 9 and Delta 8? Because that's what the whole issue is over hemp here.
We'll defer to TBI on that one, on how they report that and test it.
Okay. Chairman Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel and Mr. Stroker, thank you for being here. Is there technology out there to do a screen for drugs at the site of a traffic stop? We have breathalyzers for alcohol. Is there technology to screen someone during a traffic stop to see if they've had marijuana in their system or other drugs?
Colonel? You may know, there's none that I'm aware of, but that's I'm sure somebody's out there trying to figure that out right now. Maybe somebody that's coming after can speak to that.
Ms. Strucker, you recognize?
There, just from listening to the Cannabis Commission and being present with that, there are some things out there that are being tested, but they're not really full range yet. Those things are out there, but it's not something that we have wide access to. So, in short answer, no, not right now. But I think there's stuff out there that's trying to be used.
And if I can be
Please.
And immediately on roadside, I think there's some things that maybe return results in a couple hours.
Chairman Hawk.
And I was going to ask, just to follow up, how long does it take to find? Is it a couple hours to find out if someone is under the influence of drugs? Is it a blood test that takes a few days? What time frame are we able to get this information back? And I've got reasons to ask the question.
Colonel?
Thank you. It's a blood test that takes days, weeks, and in some cases months. TBI, I'm sure, will speak specifically to the time frame.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman. Next on the list, I have Leader Sherrill. You recognize?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Colonel, for being here. Just a couple of questions. Understanding the shortage of troopers that are on the road, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. With the shortage of troopers being on the road, would that have something to do with your numbers being down of actually catching people with drugs on their vehicle or in their vehicle on them?
Absolutely. It has something to do with it. And certainly over the last couple of years, y'all are very much aware of a couple of summers ago, we spent a lot of time here and not as focused on the road than COVID. And in an effort to protect our employees, troopers, we took measures to be seen, but maybe not have as much interaction as we were getting our hands wrapped around what it was going to present to the members. So those are all things that have factored in. But I would say we are short, but we are catching up. Hopefully you'll be seeing, everyone will be seeing the same numbers. Our focus now is getting back out there and trying to, make the roadways safer.
Yeah. Well, we just want to say to you, troopers, and all of our law enforcement officers, we appreciate y'all getting the drugs off the streets for us and taking care of our folks. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Vice Chairman Sexton. You recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question had to do with the number of 544. I think that was Elizabeth from 2017 to present. What was the numbers prior to that in the same time period, or do you have a percentage of increase from year to year?
Ms. Stroger.
Yes, I've got, I don't have anything prior to 2017 when I initially made the request from our Titan unit. I just, the request was from the past couple years. Could you pull it? I'd be more than happy to try to get the years prior, but I do have the breakdown here. I keep switching to a different document. I was sending that graph to Chairman Dixie. If you have another question, I can pull it up in about 10 seconds.
I do. I was wondering how that number also compared to alcohol-related deaths. I think that's what, a 5-year period that you're pulling from there? Mm-hmm. So do you have that data also, how that compares to just alcohol-related deaths?
Colonel, you recognize?
Yes, sir. I have the alcohol-related deaths. And I know, looking at the graphic for marijuana, there's been a little bit of an increase each year. 2017, we had 236. 2018, 193. 2019, 268. 2020, 280, 2021, 290, and reporting as of today, we're at 44. But
so
you recognize?
I didn't add that up as we went, but I was just wondering. So that's probably about, it's more than double. I'm sure it's almost triple, maybe.
It's about 1,300.
It's getting close, yes.
Okay.
1,300.
All right,
And yes, I pulled this number, and you're looking at 2017, 69, 18, 98, 19, 118, 2020, 140, 2021, 120, and then none yet for 2022.
So it's showing a slight increase each year. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, I have Chairman Russell. You recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Colonel, for being here. Do y'all still have any DARE officers left in the state of Tennessee?
We have a DARE, oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Chairman. We have a DARE coordinator, but we don't have DARE officers within THP.
Is the DARE coordinator said anything about the schools, Delta 8 related?
I'd have to leave here and ask that question. But I think it is something that I'm sure somebody behind me will speak to that, but I think it is a problem that has come up in schools.
Thank you.
Next on the list, I have Chairman Farmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Committee. And I have just one more question. With regards to the traffic fatalities, does that include the driver or any passenger that may have died in that accident?
I may defer to Colonel on that. When y'all pull traffic fatalities, is it anyone or is it just the driver?
We try to break it down. In this case, for my drug impaired, I've got it broke down for the driver had drugs, and then I've got it broke down for, other people involved. Well, I'm sorry. In my case, I've just got it broke down to drivers involved, but we can break that down, but I don't know the numbers that we've just reported to you on drugs, if it's been broke down. I think it's drivers, but without going back and asking.
Okay, the person is typing who pulled the report, so hopefully he can give me an answer here. But I did want to address, I told you I'd check up on that. When he pulled the numbers, he strictly pulled marijuana numbers. He said that doesn't mean that there couldn't have been something else on the TOX report, but we'd have to go back and pull every single TOX report to check. But as we had it, that's what we had pulled it with. So it is possible there could have been other drugs on that TOX report as well.
Chairman Farmer.
Right, and that's why I asked that
Right.
specifically,
Yes,
because
sir.
it wouldn't be a fair and accurate representation of the effects of a cannabinoid if we had other drugs involved as well, especially with the opioids and then fentanyl or whatever else is going around that may have been
Yes, sir.
in a person's system. So thank you so much.
And if he replies, it's just drivers
Thank you.
for that number.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want to make sure that's right. So in 2017, you're talking about 69 drivers were impaired by cannabis who passed away. 98, 118, 140, 120.
Not necessarily passed away, involved in either they were involved in a crash where someone
Where
died.
there was a fatality. Yes. Okay, very good. Well, because that to me, that's the interesting point, which is typically when we're having a conversation of this nature, at least the years since I've been in the General Assembly, we're talking about potentially loosening regulations on something, and we're wondering what effect on public safety will that have. What I want to remind everybody is that what we're talking about here is perfectly legal, so we don't have to wonder what will happen. I think we look back and see what has happened. 545 since 2017 compared to 13 to 1,400 on alcohol. Is that accurate? Okay, all right. I have nobody else on my list. I did have a couple of, and I guess when we talk about packaging in a moment, but your testimony, you talked about how some of these products are available at a gas station, let's say, on the counter. In much the same way a beer is, by the way, but I think we've all been much better educated about the impacts of alcohol and of that beer, and no, you're not supposed to drink and drive. So do you think that better messaging, the way we've had, this however many years we've been regulating the alcohol industry, I mean, would that be helpful, or do you feel like the presence of cannabinoids at all anywhere, are gonna inherently be dangerous to our roadways? Is it more about education on the consumer, or is it more about just the product itself?
I think it's both. I mean, the problem we talk about, we've got the data to talk about those crashes. The problem is, I didn't, and I'm speaking from personal experience, just seeing it at a gas station, not somebody telling me. So I didn't see it at gas stations 6 months ago. It is something that's, and I've seen it in my own life. I have kids. I've got an 18, a 20-year-old, and a 16-year-old. I've seen it and some of those effects, personally. So I know the accessibility is there more than ever, and there is a complete lack of education and knowledge, because we know the things by the cash register intended, those quick items, gum and candy, buy it, take it, it's all good. And so there is a complete lack of education and knowledge of what impairment looks like. And we know the same thing with, Chairman Farmer speaking about opioids and stuff. they're legal, prescribed, but they're a huge problem, and the misuse, and so that's our concern. The more available, the more accessible, the more people using it, the potential for more drivers out there, making the roadways unsafe.
Well, thank you very much. I have no other questions. Chairman Russell, you recognize.
Thank you, Chairman. And Colonel, what drugs are covered in the Tennessee Driver's Handbook?
It's a great question. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
It's been a while since I've read it, unfortunately. I need to.
I'll look it up.
Yes, sir.
I can get you a copy and bring it to you if you want to go through the 120-page one and go through
I'll
it.
just look it up online.
We won't make you take the test in front of us. Representative Griffey, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to take a moment of personal privilege and express my appreciation to you and all the troopers out there, and what a fantastic job y'all do to protect the public. My daughter actually was in a wreck, and you guys are there, and just appreciate everything you guys do. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon to you. Y'all need a raise. We're going to get that out the way right now. And obviously, you still need more troopers on the roads and highways. And now you've picked up the loop in Memphis, Shelby County. Y'all need a raise, and you need more troopers. Okay? Now, I missed some of the conversation, so I'm just going to ask a simple, broad question. What is it that you need legislatively, besides a raise and more troopers, that you would like for us to carry away from here today?
Colonel, if you have an answer to that question, we'd love to hear it.
Well, I didn't come in today thinking about that question other than what we've already asked for legislatively. Wow, I don't think I can answer that, Representative Hardaway, but I'd love to think about it, and I will get back to you. Y'all have supported us as an agency, and it's been unbelievable, and we certainly appreciate that.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Chairman. And to even if we win, we move forward with the legislation for you to do the best job possible, you need more troopers, don't you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Otherwise, and you don't have to respond to this part, otherwise it's akin to an unfunded mandate on your department. So that's for the benefit of my colleagues and the governor. Y'all need more troopers, and you need a raise so you can carry out the legislation, the directives that we're putting on you. Right? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your service and all the other troopers on the road.
Thank you, Representative Hardaway. Thank you very much. Next on my list, we have representatives from the TBI. We'll let you get settled there. And again, just state your name for the record, share with this committee whatever you'd like, and we'll have time for question and answers.
Rachel Russell, I'm Deputy Counsel and Policy for the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. And in recognition of your all's time, because I know there are numerous other law enforcement individuals here to testify, today we are going to focus, at least our testimony, mostly on the lab side of things, the forensic side of things, the difficulty that we are seeing as far as testing as it relates to these substances. Obviously, we are happy to answer any questions that you all have, but in that vein, I do have our Assistant Director over the Forensic Division, Mike Little, here, and I will let him use the rest of our time.
I'm Mike Little. I'm Assistant Director over the TBI Forensic Services Division, which means the crime lab. I guess when you think about the crime lab, you think of it as one big lab, but in reality, it's one lab divided up into several smaller labs. So when it comes to discussing marijuana, Delta 8, Delta 9, and all things hemp, we really need to focus on solid drug doses. You're handing me some plant material, and I need to determine what that is. And then in a separate lab, we deal with blood samples that are submitted from these driving cases that we've discussed in THP. So I'd be happy to address either of those, but they're going to be very different.
Well, thank you very much. I guess to that point, I'll kick us off here. I mean, so if you've got a blood sample, then do you have a test or a way to discern between Delta 8 cannabinoids, Delta 9 cannabinoids, or any of the others?
Right. Short answer, we do not. To give you a little background on that, we recently had a case submitted from Coffee County that involved 4 individuals, 1 babysitter, and 3 children, ages 4, 5, and 9. It was suspected, the case circumstances, that these kids got into mom's Delta 8 THC. Those blood samples were sent in from those kids. We analyzed those, and we saw that there was a problem. We knew that there was a THC compound there, but we couldn't confirm that it was Delta 9 or Delta 8. We then reached out to a reference lab that we use in Pennsylvania to say, hey, can you guys do testing on this? It doesn't exist. There is no blood test that we are aware of that we could even buy to tell whether there was Delta 9 or Delta 8 in these samples. So we asked for the solid dose to be sent in. We were able to determine, because we can tell the difference in solid dose, whether it is Delta 9 or Delta 8. It was, in fact, Delta 8 in this case, and since that time, we have now gone to generically reporting all Delta 8, Delta 9, and THC compounds simply as THC in a blood sample.
So the follow-up then, so in the blood sample, what the blood sample told you was there was THC present?
Correct.
Okay. When you say the solid dose, you mean the actual product, the
Exactly, the
gummy,
product
the
itself.
cookie, the whatever it was, that you can test and see whether it's what type of cannabinoid it is.
Right. I mean, you're dealing with, there's a million times the concentration of THC in a solid dose drug compared to what's in a blood sample. So the testing is just very different.
Okay, very good. I think I've given time for the list to build, so I've got Representative Griffey. You're recognized.
Thank you very much. Thank you, General Counsel Russell and Assistant Director Little. Let me ask you this. Can you give us the numbers, approximation of the numbers of tests TBI is asked to conduct on drug testing materials versus the numbers of blood samples that are generally submitted on an annual basis on average?
Mr. Little, you're recognized.
We receive on average about, off the top of my head, around 32,000 cases of drugs, of solid dosage drugs that are submitted. In blood samples for DUI cases or other driving-related cases, about 95% of the blood samples we receive are in driving-related cases. That number is probably more on the order of about 20,000 samples per year.
Okay, thank you.
Next on the list, I have Chairman Russell. You recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And what's the turnaround time from the time law enforcement officers send it in to the time they receive the results?
It varies from case to case. On a blood alcohol, it's about 10 weeks. If it requires drug screen or drug testing after that on a blood sample, it's about 20 to 25 weeks. On a solid dosage drug, it's about 20 weeks.
Chairman Russell.
If I remember correct, back in the days I was in law enforcement, some drugs would come back with a therapeutic level. Does THC results come back like that in a blood test?
So what you're discussing, and we don't put this on a report, but it's something that we're frequently asked to discuss in court, is the difference between a therapeutic level, a lethal level, or a toxic level of a drug. So what I like to say is if you're taking an anesthetic, for example, when that drug is having its desired effect, its therapeutic range, you're unconscious. So drugs are tools. They have different uses. So a therapeutic range for one drug may be conducive to operating a motor vehicle. In other cases, it might not be. So we try to avoid that in terms of saying whether somebody's impaired or not. It's even more difficult when you start talking about abused drugs to say what that therapeutic level is.
And is the sample measured in nanograms, or how's it measured?
In drug samples, it varies. In bloods, it could be nanograms per milliliter. It could be micrograms per milliliter, kind of depending on what's appropriate for that drug.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, I have Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to you. On the question of testing, why the lengthy time for turnaround?
Mr. Little.
Short answer is we have more samples being submitted than we have people and equipment to test those samples.
Representative Hardaway.
And the increase in testing, are you ramping up this year to meet that demand? Is it possible for the justice system to flow without getting a backlog waiting for test results?
You recognized.
That's kind of a two-part answer. We have asked, and we've been granted, we're hoping, 20 positions that we are going to use to help address these problems. Two of those are going to be, we are earmarked towards working on the blood samples. 6 of those people are earmarked towards working on the solid dose samples. We also have, as you're aware, a sexual assault kit problem in Tennessee. So we have 6 people addressed, or 5 people addressed to work on the sexual assault kit problem. So 20 people get spread there pretty thin. What was the second part of your question again?
Representative Hardaway.
On the backlog and the jam for the justice system, waiting for the drug tests, what's your impact there?
Mr. Little.
Yes. So we work with officers, we work with district attorney generals to try to determine which cases are important to those and which ones need to be tested to proceed. I produce a list every month that I send out to the district attorney generals of pending cases for them to let us know what cases they no longer have interest in or what cases have been pled and no longer require testing. So basically what happens is that the law enforcement agencies submit cases that they have interest in. We perform testing on that, and the district attorney generals then choose those cases to be prosecuted. We're trying to close that loop and work with the DAs to really focus on those cases that they need.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you. And when you request an increase in personnel, are you anticipating the future increases, the demand for testing?
Mr.
Or are
Little.
you trying to meet today's level?
Unfortunately, it's a little bit of both. We always try to have an eye towards the future in determining what drugs or what trends are coming and where we need to put our resources. But with the turnaround times that I discussed, we're always battling almost a losing battle in terms of trying to play catch up to the cases that we already have.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm winding down. I'm trying to get an understanding out of the 20 that you have coming on board now. What will be the turnaround time once everyone is in place?
Mr. Little.
That depends on different disciplines. We're hoping with a goal first of being 12-week turnaround time, but really, as I've discussed with my people, turnaround time is really the amount of time that case spends sitting on a shelf. It really doesn't need to spend any time sitting on a shelf. It may take a week or two to get that tested. That's a pretty lofty aspiration to say that we can get things done in a week or two, but we're really trying to cut down on the time that case just spends idle.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How do we compare to the other states? You made, for instance, a reference to Pennsylvania.
Right.
But I'm more concerned with how do we prepare with the contiguous states around Tennessee?
Mr. Little.
We, as part of our request for positions, did a survey of other states in the southeastern area, and what we found is that we're fairly typical in terms of turnaround time, but what we also found is that we are last in terms of the amount of work that each person is required to do. We submit data to a group called Foresight, which is done by West Virginia University. They compile data from about 200 to 300 different forensic labs across the country and internationally. We were given what ended up being, in my opinion, kind of a dubious award by them at the last meeting of this group, which was called their Maximus Award, meaning that we are operating at 95% or greater efficiency. So we're doing the best with the resources we have. Unfortunately, compared to other states, we just need more resources.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's obvious that to complete our criminal justice reform, we need to give TBI more agents and a raise.
Loud and clear. Next on my list, I have Chairman Farmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess this may be for Mr. Long. With regards to, we're talking about the, how do you say, it was the therapeutic dosage amounts. And I think you'd said something along the lines of toxic and then fatal dosages. What's the fatal dosage, or is there a fatal dosage for Delta 9, and or are you aware of a fatal dosage for Delta 8?
Mr. Little.
I'm not aware of a fatal dose of Delta 8 or Delta 9, meaning that if you take enough of that, it will kill you. In the case that we worked with these children, all 3 of those kids required medical attention. One of them was described by the assistant district attorney as being a life-threatening situation. We are currently working a case out of, I'm not sure which county it is, but the only thing that they found associated with this death case is a Delta 8 cartridge. So it's something that we're learning about.
Sure, sure. Okay. Thank you. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Next on my list, I have Chairman Moody. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess this would go to you, Mr. Little. I'm curious about the plant side of things. And so I might know just enough to be dangerous, but when you're testing the plant, you're not able to tell by just looking at the plant what it is? Or I guess just explain what you're testing.
Mr. Little, you're recognized.
So the plant itself is cannabis sativa. Whether it's hemp or whether it's marijuana, it's the same species of plant. It's just selectively bred to grow or to contain a high amount of THC, a high amount of CBD, or other compounds. So visually, there's no way to look at that and determine what that is. Over the last 2 years, we've tested 13,381 examples of plant material that have been submitted to us by law enforcement officers. And what we found is about 87% of the time, that's presumptively, when we do color tests on that, indicative of it containing THC and being a marijuana plant. About 13% of that time, or in 1,748 cases, that ends up being consistent with hemp. What I think we've run into is that the TBI has been turned into the de facto regulatory lab for marijuana versus hemp. These are 1,748 cases where perhaps these people shouldn't have been bothered by law enforcement officers. We shouldn't have been testing their samples. And it's my understanding that there would be no prosecution in these cases. So we're just trying to fix that system.
Chairman Moody.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, I have Chairman Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I may be going down the same road as well. I want to talk about the science of that. The science of the THC that you see from hemp in the blood is identical to the science you see measuring THC from marijuana in blood.
Right. Assuming that that person has the same compound that came from that same plant, we can't tell the difference. To go down that path a little bit further, there's been some discussion about whether the THC came from a synthetic source or was naturally occurring. We simply can't tell. THC is THC, or Delta-9 is Delta-9 as far as we're concerned.
I'm going to follow up. You did say something about the solids that you can tell the difference. Now, is that solids in terms of the plant you're looking at, solids in terms of the deconstructed THC that's gone into an edible? What are the solids that you're discussing?
Yeah, that's basically correct. When I say solids, I'm talking about everything that's not a biological sample. So it could be gummies, it could be plant material, it could be a brownie, it could be a cookie. We're dealing with milligram amounts in those by the time they're submitted to us, and it's just an easier test to do. So we're able to separate that Delta-9 and that Delta-8 and be able to tell you which one is present.
So just to clarify, when you say everything that's not a biological, you mean everything that's not blood?
Exactly.
Yes.
We occasionally get urine, but generally speaking, it's blood.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That exhausts my Leader Lamberth. You recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just briefly, always good to see you, my friend. We've known each other for almost 20 years, and I just really, really appreciate the work you do. Would it be fair to say that the more regulation and testing and product labeling and control on the front end, the less work it's going to be for you all on the back end to try to identify what these products are? I mean, if there's a lot of front end work like there is with alcohol or other products, I mean, you just don't see as much on the back end. Is that fair enough?
Mr. Little.
I think that that's a fair thing to say, that if people had a license or some way to prove that what they had was hemp and that they're satisfying the law, it wouldn't show up in our lab and we wouldn't have to test it and we'd be able to do other things.
Amen. You recognize her.
And Mr. Chairman, that's, and I've met with several folks in the last week or so, and that's been a common theme of literally folks in the industry, folks in law enforcement, for everything, is that, I know this, we'll get into the bill, next week or whenever, but that's honestly where, as the sponsor of the bill, my intention of where to go. I don't want those 1,700 folks, or their property in your lab, and I don't think they want to be there. I mean, that stuff should have been done long before it got to TBI, because that's taking valuable time away. Quite frankly, your personnel to be able to go after criminals that are out there that are doing other things. And so food for thought, I just wanted to highlight what was just said. I mean, in essence, and these are our decisions we've made in crafting this hemp versus marijuana and everything else and not really specifying this, we've unfortunately turned the TBI lab into the quality control unit for the hemp industry, and that's not acceptable. I mean, it's just not. So thank you very much for being here today, and I deeply appreciate the work you do.
Thank you, Leader. And I think that's exactly right, which is if we've got law-abiding citizens, let's set those standards, figure out what they are, and then they don't wind up being the de facto lab for what's hemp and what's marijuana. Very good. Representative Griffey for follow-up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Again, Director Little, thank you. I've toured the lab. I'm aware of at least tangentially aware of the monumental task that we've placed on you through regulations and so forth. In addition to the approximate 32,000 tests for drug testing on product substances, and the 20,000 for blood samples you guys do, that's separate and apart from all the other additional tests TBI is requested to do, DNA samples on guns and rape kits and everything else. Do you have an approximate number of all the other additional tests TBI lab is requested to perform every year, in addition to the approximately 55,000 other tests you're doing?
That's a tough one. That's a tough one to answer. We probably open anywhere between 60 and 65,000 cases per year. The things that you discussed, guns and DNA, those are far more complex. So those are generally lower volume, but require, on a per case basis, far more manpower.
Representative Griffey.
Thank you. And approximately how many lab assistants personnel do you have performing testing total?
We currently have in the forensic division about 150 people. With the influx of positions that we've asked for that we're hoping to get in this budget, that will increase to 175.
Representative Griffey.
Thank you. Let me ask you this, and look, being a former assistant DA prosecutor, sometimes you really need to focus on the big important things, and sometimes other things have less important. When you talk about a murder versus something else going on. I am aware that a lot of our medical personnel can do testing, blood samples. If someone goes to the hospital, they can screen for drugs, toxin, alcohol, stuff like that. Look, you're the subject matter expert here, and I know you're short staffed. You don't have enough funding. I personally, if I had to say so, I'd be funding you more and a raise and more troopers and more TBI personnel. Would it benefit the state of Tennessee if maybe we shifted TBI's focus away from some of the blood sample testing and allow the private labs, the hospitals and stuff to do those, and we regulate the admission of those testing, the DUIs, the toxicology on those drug substances, and allow that to sort of pick up by the private sector perhaps, and let TBI focus its resources on the major, really important stuff?
Mr. Little.
Your 2 cents on it.
That's a good idea on the surface. The challenge that we face with that, and I don't want to oppose what your idea is that not only do we provide testing in these cases, but we also provide court testimony in these cases. And so to get a piece of paper from a private lab that says this is what this sample contains might cost a couple of $100s, but it costs tens of thousands of dollars to get somebody in to provide testimony, if you can even get that person to come in.
Understood. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Yes, sir. And finally on my list, I have Chairman Dixie. You're recognized.
Thank you. And you may or may not know the answer to this, but I was just wondering. Do you know how the Delta 88 is made? And like if you have a Delta 88 gummy or a Delta 10 or 9, the numbers, I guess it doesn't matter what comes after it. How is it actually made?
I will do my best to answer that question, and that's really kind of secondary. But my understanding is that you can't go out and pick marijuana that contains a high amount of Delta 8. That really what's going on, as it's been described to me, is that we have produced more CBD than we know what to do with. They're converting CBD by adding acid to it into Delta 8 and reapplying that to plant material or adding it to other foodstuffs or gummies.
Chairman Dixie.
No other questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here today. We appreciate your testimony. Members, that brings us next on our list is General Fred Agee. General Agee, if you could state your name, obviously, for the record and where you're from, and share with this committee whatever you'd like. If you see the red dot illuminated.
Okay. Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having me today. Thank you, committee members, for having me as well. I'm Frederick Agee. I am the district attorney for the people of Gibson, Crockett, and Haywood counties. Haywood County is where Blue Oval City's going, Ford Motor Company. We're very proud to have Ford coming in. Thank y'all for doing what y'all did to facilitate that. I think this is going to be a lot of energy that we need in rural West Tennessee to get our economy going. First, I want to let y'all know I am not here to speak for the District Attorney General's Conference. I'm not here speaking for them. I'm also a board member for the West Tennessee Drug Task Force. My director is back here to the right. I'm not here to speak for them either. I'm here to speak as the DA for the 28th Judicial District. I'd also like to thank Chairman Curcio. A couple years ago, I was in Kuwait serving our country in the U.S. Army Reserves, and I went for the appointment for DA, and he took my phone calls when I was overseas in a different time zone, and trying to accomplish something that's very hard to do when you're on another continent serving the country. So my position here today is that Tennessee is one of the most violent states in the union. We're top 5 in the country for women that are killed by men. And in our district and in my office, we're focusing on violent crime, because violent crime is what, prosecuting those crimes is what I feel keeps our community safe. And sometimes we have other policies, legislation, bills that distract us from that. But the real focus of the criminal justice system needs to be on violent crime. DAs across the state, we have limited resources. And Representative Hardaway earlier asked the state trooper, Colonel Perry, what he needed. We need more prosecutors. I've asked the conference to submitted what I feel like I need for our district, but we need more prosecutors. We have limited resources. So as the DA, I have to make a decision. Are we going to take a violent case to trial, or are we going to take a non-violent case to trial? I have one circuit court judge for 4 circuit courts. We deal with 17 different local law enforcement agencies, and I have, counting myself, I have 8 prosecutors. I have a DUI grant prosecutor, and that means I have 6 other DAs to cover. Basically, we have 13 courts in total. So that's why I'm here today, is to talk about prosecuting violent crime. And our resources should go towards murder, sex crimes, domestic assaults, things that can keep the community safe. And I will speak on the TBI. You'll ask about the backlog. And I don't work for the TBI, and I'm not speaking on them, just experience. We try to update them once a month and let them know what cases have played out, because we know they have a backlog. And I don't want them to not be able to get to a murder case that's set for trial. I want them to be able to test what we're asking them to test, and not have to wait a year or 2 years to get it. Or in the case of a DUI blood draw, you might have to wait 6 months. That case is pending in General Sessions Court, and we'd like to get cases resolved and get people moving on their way. So with that, that's why I'm here today, just to advocate my position for focusing on violent crime. If anybody has any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Thank you, General Agee. Members, any questions for Leader Lamberth? You recognize?
Thank you, General. It's good to see you today.
It's good to see you.
I really appreciate your testimony, but I'm trying to kind of boil down what the message was. And again, you and I have known each other for several years, but I caught kind of a 2-part, basically. And part of it, I know we're looking at judicial redistricting, and your district is one of the most challenging, quite frankly, and I applaud your efforts there. It's a very difficult district to just geographically cover everything. So I know we're looking at that, but we're also looking at, last year the District Attorney's Conference didn't get any new positions. This year, getting quite a few. I hope some will potentially come your direction. But, it sounds like you're operating in a position right now where you're understaffed and need additional staff. Is that fair enough?
I could use at least another prosecutor, if not a couple prosecutors.
You recognize.
And General, that's the reason I mentioned that is because the hope would be is that any law that we pass down here is that your office is able to prosecute those cases. And I only say that as somebody who used to do the job. What General Whitley used to tell me is, look, it doesn't matter if it's the smallest crime that gets committed or the biggest crime that gets committed. Your job is to make sure that justice is done and that we don't make the laws as district attorneys. And he made that very clear to me, is that that's the legislature's job. And so be it a driving on suspended license or a speeding ticket or just about anything, and we didn't really get involved in very many speeding tickets, but a ton of driving-related things all the way up to first-degree murder. I mean, our instructions were, look, you go to court and you handle each one of those as the individual that they are. And it sounds like that's what you're kind of messaging with us today, is that we're going to have to pick something. And we're either going to have to start taking some laws off the books and give you less caseload to handle, or we got to get you some more people. Is that kind of the message?
Well, I mean, I think that, prosecutors, we have great discretion, awesome responsibility, and of course, I hope that, we never lose our discretion because we're there locally and we're dealing with the law enforcement officers, the witnesses, the victims, the proof of the case. What I'm saying is that more laws are not going to necessarily make Tennessee a safer place. We need to focus on violent crimes, sex crimes, things that we know if we put violent people away, our communities are safer. That's what I'm saying.
Leader Lamberth.
Thank you. And General, my only ask of you as a legislator is, please, for goodness sake, cover all the crimes. And I don't think that's what you're saying, but I want you to absolutely focus on those violent criminals. But my only ask is that we spend an enormous amount of time down here trying to create the best laws possible. And look, we add to and subtract from the code every year, but use that discretion carefully and don't plenary. We have seen district attorneys who have just said they're not going to prosecute entire sections of the code. And we have disagreed with that vehemently. That is not part of your discretion. It's to take each case individually. So I hope we can get you the resources we need, and we will be mindful to make sure that we're not putting more on you than you can handle. Thank you.
General, I think question I have to put a finer point on it. Again, I want to remind the committee, typically when we're talking about cannabis laws, we're talking about making restriction or whether or not to make something legal or decriminalize something. This is unique because Delta-8 cannabinoids are already perfectly legal and you can buy them many places. So we don't have to wonder. My question to you is, are Delta-8 cannabinoids a major problem in your jurisdiction?
Not in my district. I mean, my director from the West Tennessee Drug Task Force, he may have a different opinion, but no one has called me and said that someone has died from a, may have happened in the state somewhere, but it's not happened in my district. I do know that there was at some point in the last 18 months, someone may have been taken to the hospital. And I don't know if that was an adult or if that was a teenager, but that's the only call I've gotten about there's confusion, obviously, with what's legal and what's not legal. But I would say that I'd be more concerned with teenagers eating Tide Pods than eating Delta-8 and Delta-9. So we're not talking about, banning Tide Pods in the Tennessee General Assembly. So,
thank you, General. Next on the list, I have Representative Griffey. You recognized?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General Agee, for being here and your service. Let me ask you this: from what I'm kind of hearing, you're the DA, you're the tip of the spear, along with law enforcement, on trying to address violent crimes, and you're aware of the burdens the laws have placed, that the legislature have placed on all of our prosecutors and law enforcement to enforce. Your boots on the ground. Do you think we should perhaps look at a system where if we're testing blood for alcohol, drugs, a lot of that stuff can get screened commercially. Do you think we should maybe look at a system whereby we might want to think about relieving some of that burden off of TBI, because they're overworked, and maybe letting them focus on the big violent crimes, the DNA testing,
Well, as was it Director Little that spoke earlier? I agree with him. I think logistically it would be a lot harder if you're dealing with private hospitals and private labs, and then the fees. I don't know what they would charge, comparing that to the TBI. But I would say this: if I were king for the day, we would test every rape kit from Memphis to Bristol before we test any more cannabinoids, marijuana, until those victims know who their perpetrator was.
Representative Griffey.
Thank you. And let me ask you this. What about a pilot program, or if maybe the state looks at contracting with a hospital, a drug screen, and a lab company saying, look, we're going to, say for a particular county, we're going to have to send all our blood samples to you for DUI or drug screening, something like that. You're going to have to provide an expert, something like that, and they're going to have to be able to come in and testify at any of the court cases, and we look at contracting for something like that. Because I'm with you. I'm more concerned about the violent crimes. And I know the logistical problem, 55,000 cases of testing objects for drug contents, and then another 20,000 for blood contents of blood samples for drugs in them. It's just an overwhelming number, and they've only got 150 lab agents being able to test this stuff. So we're kind of setting ourselves up for a failure, or at least delays. The length of delay we're getting is just because there's so much volume and we haven't adequately given them the resources. So how do we fix that?
Well, I'm not a lab tech I was not a biology major or a business major. So, that's really outside of my expertise. And to be honest with you, Representative Griffey, I haven't given that much thought other than trying to find ways to get the cases like rape cases and murder cases tested. Sometimes we do settle cases before the lab results come back. And we try to let the TBI know that, hey, the case has been settled, please take it off so you don't have to worry about testing it. But I can't, I'm not an expert in that and in contracting or anything like that, but I appreciate your question. Yes, sir.
Thank you. And last on my list, I have Chairman Hawk. You recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Agee, thank you very much for your comments. I appreciate you being here. One of the great aspects of doing this work is that we can agree to disagree and not get mad at each other.
Yes, sir. I'm glad we can have this conversation.
Yeah.
And I hope people don't take it, representatives or other folks take it personally, because
don't take it personally at all. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Hawk, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Don't take it personally at all. And I must relay what I'm hearing from my school resource officers on a daily basis, what they're dealing with some of these products that are in convenience stores right now. So I'm glad that your part of the state is not dealing with it. My part of the state is dealing with it on a daily basis. So I put that out there. Thank you, Chairman and members.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General Agee, for being here. We appreciate your testimony. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to be here. Yes. Representative Hardaway, you wish to be recognized?
Yes, sir. First, I want to thank you for being here and ask whether you're actually obligated to use TBI, or do you have the discretion of sending your samples to a private lab?
I am, as far as I know, we use the TBI. I would have to yield to our DA's conference and see if there was some third party for some reason, if there was some issue, whether we could go to a third party. I would have to yield to the conference. I can't speak on that, Representative Hardaway.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Chairman. And that, I would suggest, is some low-hanging fruit for us in terms of the legislature, a simple appropriation to you and your fellow DAs, if you have that as an option, would seem to go a long way towards helping you to deliver justice to those victims of violent crimes.
I'd yield to the conference, Representative Hardaway.
Representative Hardaway, you wish to be recognized again?
Yes, sir. I'm going to ask if you would not only yield to the conference, but urge the conference to research that and see if we can be fruitful.
Yes, sir.
Your visit here can be fruitful in that way.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your service.
General Agee, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Members, we are going to now transition to hear. Next on my list, I have Mr. John Kearns. I apologize. The next three presenters are actually going to be come up as a panel. So we've got John Kearns, Devin Arancina, and Jesse West. Did I get those right? My college Italian came back to me there. All right. These are the jokes. You can laugh or you can sit there. That's right. So you all will be testifying as a panel member. I would draw your attention to Dashboard. There is a PowerPoint presentation in Dashboard. If you are not utilizing Dashboard, it is also on the screen. So there for your viewing pleasure, and for the panel, you are recognized. Just introduce yourselves for the record and then share with this committee wherever you'd like.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me good? Okay. My name is Jesse West. I'm an attorney and also represent the Tennessee Growers Coalition in the hemp industry. I went to Lincoln Memorial University, Duncan School of Law. So I'm here to talk to you, just give a brief overview of the laws surrounding hemp and cannabinoids. And if you want to go ahead and, thank you. So the big thing we wanted to be very clear on is that Delta-8 and hemp-derived cannabinoids are federally legal. This is something the DEA and USDA have been very clear. And actually, they issued letters back in the fall of last year. And while hemp and hemp-derived cannabinoids have been legal since the Farm Bill's implementation, and in Tennessee, we implemented that in 2019. And they clarified back in fall of 2021, and that's when a lot of hemp industry people completely jumped in and invested in this industry and kind of built this infrastructure that we're starting to see today and began producing many of these products. And as you can see, we've got our definition of hemp here. That's 4327. That's the hemp code. But it actually came alive out of the criminal code, an exception to marijuana. And one of the things to be clear that in federal law and in Tennessee state law, the standard is 0.3% Delta-9 THC. And if you'll go ahead and go to the next one, this is very important because when we're talking about THC and total THC, the TDA and USDA already have standards for this and how hemp is grown. And it's important to understand that they have a post-harvest standard for these pre-harvest standard. There's a 30-day window that hemp farmers are required to test their product before harvesting. And this is important because what a lot of people don't understand is that hemp has a natural level of THC in it. It's something breeders can't breed out of the plant. But rest assured that their 30-day standard is very tried and true, and it ensures that no hemp is going to have any level of THC even close to marijuana that we would see in other states. So the key is if we went to a 0.3% total THC standard post-harvest and in end products, what that would mean is a lot of the hemp genetics we see out today would not be viable. The majority of these genetics don't meet that standard, and so we would have a big problem in our industry, not just eliminating the Delta-8 products, but it would also create an issue for farmers. And one of the other aspects I wanted to touch on is when you're changing that definition of marijuana and setting that 0.3% total THC standard, it has a lot of criminal implications. Because this wouldn't just mean a ban for hemp industry people selling these products. It would actually create criminals across our state. An example I've used before is if grandma has a thing of gummies that she uses for pain management and sleeping, and if these are Delta-8 products, we'd have to make sure to educate everyone, because if she had these products and we implemented that 0.3% standard, it could mean she would become a criminal in Tennessee, and we definitely don't want to see that. And we definitely don't want to see, this over criminalization aspect. And, I again want to thank thank the committee for being here, and I want to thank our law enforcement for testifying on this. We want to make their jobs easier, and perhaps we could have some kind of tax that would get them that pay raise so they have the resources to properly regulate these products. And then my last point, I wanted to cover Delta-8 and some other states. I've really kind of done a thorough look at these states. So there's 35 states that have some form of Delta-8 or hemp-derived THCs. Now, 15 states have banned or restricted these cannabinoids. But most of this is just a failure to regulate, and it's the hemp industry not coming to the table with the legislature, which I hope everyone understands that we've been trying to do. And additionally, it has to do with a lot of other factors. Some of these bans are actually just bans on synthetic cannabinoids, and it's important to understand there's a difference between synthesis and synthetic, and we're going to cover that later in our presentation. But the DEA standard is very clear that all hemp-derived cannabinoids are legal, and the synthetic cannabinoids are what is being banned in many of these states. And then we also wanted to point out an example of a state that has a great program. Florida has a really great program for Delta-8. They have a regulatory structure, and the DEA actually last year had a town hall with them. It's a really enlightening video, and they clarified the legality of Delta-8. But they also talked about the regulatory structure that Florida is using. Now, in some of these other states, I wanted to point out two examples. Kentucky and Texas have banned Delta-8, but right now they're actually in a temporary injunction because their courts have determined that the process was incorrect or there's some kind of constitutional issue there. And when we're looking at the fiscal notes related to this topic, we want to take into account that some type of ban or heavy restriction could mean additional money costing the state in the form of lawsuits as well. So that's definitely something to point out. But again, I just wanted to be available to answer any kind of legal questions and clarify that Delta-8 and these hemp-derived products are federally legal and legal in the state. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, Mr. West? Nope. Excuse me.
That's
John
fine.
Kearns. Thank you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. It's good to see many of you again, and I thank you for inviting my testimony today. My name is John Kearns, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of New Bloom Labs located in Chattanooga. I'm a lifelong Tennessean, having grown up in Greene County. New Bloom Labs provides the chemical analysis of hemp and hemp-derived products for the purposes of legal compliance, quality control, and consumer safety. In short, we exist to ensure that hemp products are sold with reliable labeling and that they're safe for human consumption. Our laboratory is ISO certified, registered with the DEA, and licensed as a research facility by the Tennessee Board of Pharmacy. Testing labs are the critical safety mechanism for any product that humans buy and ingest. Can you imagine consuming poultry from a farm that never screened its products for salmonella? Or drinking a beer with a label that had no reference to the amount of alcohol contained in the can? Finally, can you imagine if a dairy wasn't required to print expiration dates on its milk? The basis of all of this essential consumer-facing safety information is laboratory testing. And so with the committee's indulgence, I'd like to use a few minutes of my time to explain exactly what we do as a hemp lab and how Tennessee's jobs-rich hemp market relies on our services. From hemp field to harvest, crop drying and storage, and throughout the extraction and manufacturing process, two key concerns are primary throughout the supply chain: legal compliance and consumer safety. And these are why businesses test with companies like New Bloom Labs. To meet these industry demands, we offer the following analytical services. 1, cannabinoid potency. This test ensures that crops and finished products meet the federal standard for concentration that Congress clearly set forth in the 2018 Farm Bill. This test also ensures that manufacturers are crafting products that provide a reliable consumer experience that matches the concentrations published on the label. 2, we provide safety screenings for the following contaminants: heavy metals, pesticides, solvents, harmful microorganisms, and mycotoxins. Mycotoxins it's a poisonous residue left behind where mold has once been present in a substance. Now, it's important to make clear that the vast majority of the samples that we test pass compliance and safety screening protocols. As an example, just yesterday evening, we concluded the analysis of 120 samples that were screened for microbial contamination. 13 of those returned an indication for the presence of a microorganism. but none of those 13 indicated any level of toxicity. This is because the Tennessee hemp industry monitors its method of production vigilantly, and most industry actors are motivated to create products that provide an enjoyable or therapeutic consumer experience, all while safeguarding customers. Now, that's not to say that the hemp industry is perfect. In fact, it's crying out for consumer protection regulations that would root out potential bad actors and stabilize the industry for years and generations to come. And so, yes, as a founder and a CEO, I find myself in a place that I never thought I would. I am begging my government for regulation. Because it seems the alternative may be prohibition, which would be devastating to thousands of families across our state, including the holders of 1,039 hemp farming permits, every single one of which represents a small business. Prohibition would also be devastating to the team at New Bloom Labs, where we're currently onboarding 2 new employees with plans to add 4 more in the next 60 to 90 days. And so I thank the committee for its concern for the safety of Tennesseans. I can assure you that the industry shares it. I enthusiastically ask for this committee's support for Tennessee hemp and to thoughtfully consider right-sized regulations that would bolster our state's worldwide leadership in hemp production. An appropriately regulated industry is a safe industry. This has been proven over and over again for every type of consumer packaged good that we find at our local retailers. I thank the committee for its time.
Thank you, Mr. Kearns. And ma'am, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee, for the invitation to provide testimony regarding hemp-derived cannabinoids and consumer safety in Tennessee. My name is Devin Aracena. I chose to move my family to Tennessee for its business-friendly markets and lead on protection of personal rights. All of this on top of having the absolute best hemp program in this country. I am proud to call Nashville and Tennessee home. In 2019, I co-founded Canvas Supply Company, where I serve as the CEO. Canvas is a consumer products company that uses cannabinoids as a functional ingredient in a wide range of products. We are a growing organization expected to double our team in the next year. Canvas products are sold in more than 100 retail locations throughout Tennessee. These businesses support thousands of our neighbors, friends, family, and fellow Tennesseans on their wellness journey, offering alternative solutions to common ailments. These are all businesses that are truly dedicated to helping people. I am concerned this afternoon that pending legislation would bring economic devastation to our industry and community. In an industry that employs thousands of Tennesseans, while also, and perhaps most importantly, inhibits the ability and access of adult consumers who freely choose to safely utilize hemp cannabinoid products today. We hear you loud and clear that there are products on the market that pose potential risk. Our argument isn't there. However, it's not because the product is inherently dangerous. It's because there aren't clear regulations and testing standards in our industry. In my tenure in the industry, I have successfully operated consumer brands and retail distribution in other states where there has been a balanced level of regulation that supports growth, while also requiring proper conformance to consumer safety standards that focus first on strong testing and packaging requirements. I'd like to share some of those standards with everyone today as an example. On the slide, I've pulled them out visually as well. This is a short list, but just an example. So we've got child-proof packaging, meaning children wouldn't be able to open the package, clearly stating the milligram per serving and milligram per package, consumption warnings, QR code that goes to testing, batch and expiration that match testing, ingredients with nutritional facts, and what I believe to be one of the most important items, prohibition on marketing efforts towards minors, and most importantly, making these products available for purchase only by adults 21 and up. With clear language on potency and consumption warnings, a consumer can make an informed decision on how they choose to partake, similar to how consumers with accurate information on the labels make informed decisions on if they're going to have a beer, wine, or alcohol. Additionally, there has been some concern on cannabinoids being synthetic. I wanted to take a moment to clarify that Delta 8 and Delta 10 are not synthetic. They are synthesized products from organic inputs. The two words are very similar, synthetic and synthesized, but very importantly different. Synthesized products are common in many of our consumer goods that we consume every day. For example, in some of our favorites, beer and sugar. Tennessee is in an opportune position right now to bring the public and private sector together to create thoughtful policies for hemp-derived cannabinoids. We can be an example for the rest of the country and keep Tennessee in the leadership seat of this growing industry that will provide benefits to our state's families for generations to come. Thank you again in time for hearing us today, and we're very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Arancina. Members, do we have any questions for our panel? I do see Leader Lamberth on the list. If anybody else wants, let me know.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all. And most of you I've met with in my office or spoken to on the phone, and I appreciate your comment mentioning that we need regulations on this. And it's my understanding, again, from virtually everyone I've spoken to in the industry, that seems to be a consensus, is that you have bad actors that are almost ruining the entire industry for those that are trying to do it well. I mean, is that a fair enough statement? I don't want to overstate or misstate anything you're portraying.
You're recognized.
Leader Lamberth, I believe that is accurate. New Bloom Labs has a unique purview in that we do business with the entire supply chain. And so we know growers, we know extractors, and we know product manufacturers. And we work with tens of thousands of producers across the country. I can tell you that the vast majority are earnest producers trying to do the right thing and market their products in a responsible way. And it bothers me. It bothers me when I go into a gas station and I see products that are marketed clearly to children. That's not right, and we should do something about that in Tennessee. And that's, in fact, the beauty of a well-regulated product environment. We can rely on our state's well-crafted regulations and real enforcement mechanisms to protect this industry and continue to make it economically viable for years to come.
Leader?
Chairman, you mind if I go back and forth a little bit? I know we're tight on time.
Go ahead.
So, and thank you for saying that. And I want to thank again, the folks that have emailed and called, the industry folks I've met with. I mean, it quite frankly has been very helpful for me. I've said from the moment that this bill was quite frankly filed and amended that it is a starting point, not an ending point. And I think a lot of what you all are saying and what you've shared with me over the past few weeks makes a lot of sense. And so I want to kind of rapid fire go through a few things, and please don't let me by the speed of it overshoot anything. But I mean, it sounds like there's obviously no issue with intensive testing on the front end to make sure a product that's on the shelf is exactly as advertised. Is that fair enough?
That's right.
Okay. And I'm just going to go through a few if that's okay. I mean, again, elaborate if you want to, but just I know we're tight on time a little bit here. So, and it sounds like there's no issue with reasonable regulations dealing with packaging and controlling, over 21 only and warnings and labeling and all of that. I mean, it sounds like you want to make sure that the product that's on the shelf is exactly, so when a consumer is buying that, they have an expected experience that whatever that's going to be is exactly what it's labeled as. Is that fair enough?
That's right.
Okay. And it doesn't sound like there's any issue with licensure. I mean, with folks being licensed to do this instead of just any, 7-Eleven or BP out there being able to sell this and advertise that they're a pharmacy, in instance, or, something else, that licensure and making sure that those that are selling this fit within a certain criteria. Is that fair enough?
I would agree, sir.
Okay. And as far as consumer safety, if there are bad actors out there that are going beyond the pale and are providing products that are harmful or that are marketed to children or are doing things that, the industry standard would be well beyond, I mean, it sounds like you guys are fine, having heavy regulations that would preclude some of these bad actors from being engaged in this. Is that fair enough?
Yes, absolutely. But the easiest way to enforce and make sure that these products aren't on the retail shelf is that we need a law that says that we can remove them from the shelf if they're not compliant. As a first step, that's the number one thing. Immediately cease access to a non-compliant product, and then perhaps an investigation that goes to the root cause of why it was there in the first place.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we do with other products, and I'm glad you said that because that is, I think, a goal that should be obtainable. There are entities out there that do that with alcohol, with tobacco, with any food product. I mean, that's done already. That's not, we don't have to reinvent the wheel to do that. So again, I'm glad to hear that. And then the last thing, I mean, I think this is probably an obvious one, but you obviously don't want anyone that's a member of, your organization or your businesses to be arrested. I mean, as we heard earlier from the TBI, I mean, obviously they have a significant number of cases that are submitted to them, and it doesn't go to the TBI unless there's been law enforcement involvement. And so I know I don't want anyone out there who is selling a product where on Monday, you know, they think it's legal, and on Wednesday, a new police chief gets hired, a new officer goes to training, or quite frankly, I know you mentioned the federal regulations, the gentleman on the right, but I mean, I've looked at a lot of that. I mean, they're in flux a little too. I mean, they're looking at a lot of that right now. I mean, the FDA is issuing things, the DEA is evaluating this. If we make a decision here in the state on what is legal and what's not legal, and we make that clear and concise, I mean, that sounds to me to be a much better business model, so that you all know if the products you've got on the shelf, you don't have to worry about entanglement with law enforcement because those are legal, and you know what's not legal as well. Is a clearly defined standard there a much better standard for you all?
Well, Leader Lambert, to be clear, yes, we invite standards, and the industry should be held to those standards. It is entirely possible to craft onerous standards that are not helpful to the industry, and that would continue to be a threat to the industry. So it will take some care for sure. But yes, as a general statement, standards are not only welcome, but critical for our industry.
All right, thank you. And those are my questions, Mr. Chairman. And that's, again, that is, I wanted to just to have this conversation publicly. We've had it privately, both in my office, on the phone, via emails back and forth. And I mean, I think that's extremely good information for us to just have. And, you know, I appreciate you all being here today. Thank you.
Next on the list, I have Chairman Hawk. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, everyone, for coming. I must say that Mr. Kearns from Greene County, you all do realize they don't let us out of Greene County until you have a public speaking course. So obviously, he did a very good job. And I had to have a theater course, too, to get out of town, so they allowed me that. So thank you very much. You did a great job. I want to begin, and Mr. West, as you're speaking as well, I don't think anyone here has an issue with our hemp growers, with the industry, with the farmers that are out there doing the work. In the field, hemp and marijuana are very different. At harvest, hemp and marijuana are very different. And most points along the time frame, there are huge differences. The concerns that I have, and I don't want to speak for others, so I'm going to leave this with myself. The concerns that I have is when you get to the concentration of THC and it's boiled down to it. We heard the gentleman from the TBI say earlier that you cannot differentiate the THC in someone's blood being different from hemp and marijuana being different in their blood system. And I'm wondering if there's a difference in their brain and the reaction in someone's brain as well. So those are the concerns that I have personally about the industry and where we're going. The fact that we were looking at small percentages, that the concentration of THC in the hemp plant itself is very, very low. But when it gets boiled down, when it gets concentrated, when it becomes a product that, and again, I've said this 3 times, that when my school resource officers are coming to me in fear because they are seeing this on a daily basis in their schools, that's what worries me. Can you help me with that science, please, sir?
Yeah, well, the first thing you talked about was the farmer. Can you hear me good? Okay. The first thing you talked about is the farmers. And one of the things I wanted to make sure is that we're just setting attainable standards. And I believe that the department's current standards and the USDA's current standards are attainable, and they're working well. When it comes to the science in the brain, well, one of the things I wanted to make sure to say, we talked a lot about traffic and traffic fatalities. No one should be driving under the influence of any substance, but I think dosing and regulation will really help with that. I mean, for one, making sure people are 21 and up, that parents aren't leaving these products out and their kids aren't getting them. They need to put them up in their liquor cabinet or putting somewhere that they know are safe and not accessible. But also just making people understand that there's dosing, and that if they take a product, that they know how long it should last and know the effects. That's going to greatly reduce the traffic incidences that we have. And I think in some other states, we've seen when they've regulated cannabis products, they've seen those traffic situations go down because, you understand what you're getting. I'll leave it to Mr. Kearns for the science, though.
Well, First of all, I'm happy to comment as best I can on any of these. Let me say at the front end, I'm here on behalf of my company and proud to say I'm here on behalf of an industry. I am not personally a technical professional. I'm not a chemist. I'm the CEO and founder of my company. But I've heard a lot of talk today about the caseload that TBI has. And let me say that if we come up with a regulatory system that requires the testing of these products on the front end, and we know that before they ever go to market, that they're already compliant, then that reduces the caseload on the back end for the TBI so that they can do serious work and put more focus on things like violent crimes and serious illicit drugs. So I don't think that the TBI needs to enter into a contract with a private lab for its casework. I think we need to require the industry to test its own products, because at current, Tennessee code is silent on the role of testing labs, and that needs to change.
Just to follow up, and we've talked a lot about science, I think on the front end, again, and if your company or some other company out there, we're all entrepreneurs here. We like to encourage entrepreneurship. If we can work with law enforcement in some way to create that better test, in addition to work with law enforcement to create the test that I mentioned earlier in conversation, to help law enforcement when they're making a traffic stop. Let's create that science to where we can better identify if someone is under the influence of a substantial amount of this THC. So that would be helpful. I'll challenge you as a business person, as a business model, to see what we can do, what you can do, to try to put that in the context of your business as well. Thank you, Chairman and members.
Thank you, Chairman. Next, I have Chairman Farmer. Are you recognized? I'll pass. Chairman Holsey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the gummy bears you got up there, I can't see that far to see what the milligram dosage is. But based on the amount of milligrams in that one package, how many gummy bears can you eat before it begins to impair decision-making or motor skills or that kind of thing?
Yeah.
In other words, does it compound itself, and is that how it works?
So the psychoactive effects of cannabis and hemp-derived products don't really work that way. Let me give you a for instance. I don't prefer to consume Delta-8 THC. I'm THC sensitive. I don't really care for the experience. I have family members, parents in fact, that do consume D8 gummies every night to help with sleeplessness. Right? And so there's no one answer. That the psychoactive effect, any sort of direct line that one might draw from the concentration in one unit of an element to the level of impairment in a person, there is no such direct line because our bodies process these materials in different ways.
Chairman Holsey, any follow-up?
Well, most people tell you how many joints will mess you up, so I thought maybe there would be a definitive answer how many gummy bears would mess you up.
Mr. West, if you have an answer for how many joints will mess you up, we'd love to hear it.
I do not.
I saw you raising your hand. I didn't know.
But I just wanted to point out and make a comparison. A lot of this has to do with knowing yourself and knowing the effects of these products. And part of that is education and dosing. And for instance, an example, alcohol. You know how many beers it will take before you're intoxicated. And everyone's different, depending on your size, weight, activity, body, whatever you do. It can be a factor. And so cannabis is just the same as alcohol in that way. There's a variety of factors that can cause different levels of intoxication. And the key is going to be education of our consumers and then them knowing what's in their product and what dose they're taking at the time. Does that kind of sort of answer your question?
Chairman Holsey?
Thank you.
Next on my list, I have Chairman Russell. You recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And does any of y'all work in any states that already has regulations? And could you talk about that?
Yes, sir. We work in many states across the nation. Many of them have wonderful regulation. Some of them have pushed forward bans. We touched on it, that those states are in injunction right now because of issues in the way that they arrived there. It's a forward-moving industry, so the more we can get smart regulations around it in our state level, and there's great states to look at that have some of this regulation, that have worked very closely with the DEA to get that regulation. Florida is one of them, where they allow these hemp-derived cannabinoids to be safely regulated and are not seeing as many issues.
So you all personally have dealt with these states?
Yes.
Okay. And on this slide that's up there right now, the one that says cannabinoid packaging standards, you mentioned regulating against minors. How do you define minors?
Under 21.
Under 21. Okay, thank you.
And finally on my list, I have Representative Sherrill. You recognized?
Thank you, Chairman. In your comment earlier, I think you were sort of saying that maybe we need to do more on the front end. Is that correct?
Yes, right now, there's no law in Tennessee requiring producers to conduct any sort of consumer product testing at all. And so a Delta 8 product could be on the shelf, and I can almost assure you that a Delta 8 product is on the shelf, not far from this location right now, that's never been tested. We have no regulatory framework to enforce whether or not that product should be on the shelf. I don't believe that it should unless it's been tested, and that's what the law is crying out for.
Representative Sherrill.
So don't we test this in the field, the marijuana or the hemp or whatever you want to say about it? Don't we test in the field before it's actually sent to the producer or the processing product?
To the panel.
Yes, Representative, we certainly do, but those concentrations of these different analytes change over time throughout the manufacturing process and the supply chain. So when a crop is harvested in October of this year, say, and then by May of next year it's turned into an edible, that concentration will fluctuate quite a bit before it's arrived at the final consumer product. It's important to test not only the crop, but the final product as well.
Representative Sherrill.
So does the product, marijuana, hemp, or whatever, does it get hotter? I've heard people talking about this. Does it get hotter as it leaves the field to it goes to the factory to go through the process? Is that correct?
So you're asking a question that's related to manufacturing specifically, and there are any number of different manufacturing processes. In many instances, that might be the case, but that's not to say that if a substance gets hotter during part of the supply chain, that it's not diluted out by quite a bit before it becomes a consumer product. And I know Devin is more intimately familiar with the manufacturing process, so perhaps I should defer to her.
It's all about concentrations. So when something comes out of the field, it's one way, and then throughout the manufacturing process, we can concentrate it, make it very concentrated, so that we have an oil or a distillate, and then we formulate it out into finished goods. What you're referencing on a legal thing is pre-harvest law that we're trying to essentially impose on post-harvest consumer goods. I'll keep relating it to the alcohol industry because Tennessee knows that one really well. It's the same as you would concentrate hops and then further dilute it out when you go to can a beer.
So in his comment earlier about maybe we needed to do more on the front end, so are you wanting to put more of this problem up on Department of Agriculture? We do have representation here of Department of Agriculture, so are you sort of wanting to put more of the burden up on them to make sure that they don't let this product get too hot before it gets to the factory?
Representative, no, I'm not suggesting that. What I'm suggesting is requirements for testing on consumer products before they are distributed into the market for retail sale. That way, if we know in Tennessee that products are compliant on the front end, it means far less casework in criminal court and on the part of our investigators on the back end. Right now, because there is no testing standards in Tennessee, there's no guarantee, and because there are no thresholds for compliance, there's no way to assure consumers about what's in that product, whether it's consumer safe or whether it's legally compliant at all.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I think to put a finer point on it, what they're saying is the representative here from Canvast has labeled her product. She's got dosage. She's got all this information on here, But she's doing that because she's a good person, for lack of a better term. There's no state law that requires her to do that. Moreover, there's nobody at the state or who is regulated by the state that verifies whether or not that's accurate. Now, again, she's a good actor. She doesn't want to make people sick. So I could reasonably believe that what she's put on that package is accurate, but somebody else could easily imitate her product, pretend that they're her, basically, because there's no consumer regulation that prohibits that in Tennessee, rip off her logo and everything else, slap those same disclosures on the back, but absolutely zero testing of the actual product has happened. So what they're saying is nobody's responsible for they're doing it because they're good actors, but I'm sure there's plenty of nefarious folks that are not doing it out of the goodness of their heart. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, next on my list, I have Representative Hardaway. You recognized?
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon to you. Thank you for being here. And I'm not going to cover a lot. Chairman hit one on dosage on the packaging. Is the packaging regulations, labeling regulations that you have in mind, will that include dosage, and will there be any warnings on there for health or medical or operating machinery or driving? What do you envision as being on the package, the label?
Thank you. We do I'm just going to list these out. So on here we have consumption warnings. So do not operate heavy machinery, or which would include driving. So that's a consumption warning. So that's giving someone a heads up. The same way we have these on beer, wine, and liquor labels. That's giving someone the heads up that this is going to have an effect on you. I would want some sort of dosing requirements on there. So you have to say how much is in it. The same way we can't go into a liquor store and buy beer or wine without it clearly stating it on the label. So someone can also, in time, with consumer education and the growth of our industry, they start understanding what these milligrams per serving mean, and they can consume with information.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Chairman. And will there be recommendations based upon size, weight, and whatever else impacts the time that it takes to metabolize the product?
Yes, that's really up to our industry to continue educating consumers. There's multiple different ways to consume hemp-derived cannabinoids. So the more time we have to educate consumers on those different methods, on someone's different height, weight, size, on their stage of health, we can start helping someone learn what dose would be right for them. But the safest thing is start low and slow.
Representative Hardaway.
And you reference education a number of times. Tell me what that education looks like for the consumer.
So it looks like a lot of education because this plant has been prohibited for so long. So at my company, we start first with explaining what someone's endocannabinoid system is. So that's the system in your body that these plant compounds interact with. And then from there, describing all of the different cannabinoids. There's over 100 of them, and how they could have a different effect with your system.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you. And who should be doing this? Is this something we ought to be teaching our children in school, or do we hold Saturday classes, or online? How do we educate the consumer?
I don't know if it would be happening in school because I really believe strongly that this is a 21 and up product. But who should be doing it? I mean, the more we can talk about it and not ban it and not prohibit it, it gives us more of a platform to educate consumers. I think the industry as a whole, the trade associations within the industry are responsible for it, brands within the industry, and the retailers that distribute this product are the ones responsible and currently doing the education.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm still not getting a clear idea. Perhaps the two gentlemen would care to take a shot at it. Does the industry Does your company have a plan, have a strategy for educating the consumer?
Representative Hardaway, yes, we do. In fact, right now, my company is building a media suite so that we can turn out YouTube videos regularly to educate both consumers about hemp-derived cannabinoids, but also educate the industry. And as folks are interested in entering the industry, perhaps in production, educate them about the importance of lab testing, how to read a lab report. So I think the answer to your question is this is going to be a collaborative effort between all parts of the supply chain in the industry. I love the open exchange of ideas that we've had here in this forum today. I hope that it continues, and I hope that we can continue to collaborate with our government regulators and our lawmakers on how to best educate Tennesseans about this new product.
Thank you, Representative Hardaway.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I was going to give the young
I'm sorry.
gentleman a
Go ahead.
chance.
No, I think that's well said. I think the Tennessee Growers Coalition works really hard to educate our members and to educate the entire industry. I think it can be done through media platforms. It can be done through customer and retailer interactions. I think that's one key area that when people are selling these products, they know what's in their products, they know what it does, and they know what to expect, and they can relay that message to a consumer so they know what to expect.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
I'm your expert on smoothies, but I can't help with that.
Next on my list, I have Chairman Doggett. You recognized?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I know that our time is running short, but I have thoroughly enjoyed this presentation that we've had today. It's been very informative, and so I want to say thank you for your time being here. Over the last several days, I've spoken with a number of constituents about the Delta 8 in particular, and have been educated by them as to some of the things that they brought to my attention. And I do have a few questions, but I'll try my best, Mr. Chairman, to be brief with this. From what I understand, the natural levels of THC that is found in Delta 8 is very low. Would I be correct in saying that?
Yeah, I think the levels that we find in current hemp plants are very low, but it's something I believe people are selectively breeding, just like we do all types of plants to raise that level.
You recognize?
And there's a method that's being used. It's called like a synthetic conversion or something like that. Does that sound correct? That helps add more effect, I guess, to it in the process of making a final product?
It's synthesis, so it's a scientific process of taking an organic compound, synthesizing it through selective isomerization to get to an end result product. It sounds big and scary, but it's how sugar is turned into glucose and fructose and then formulated into consumer goods.
You recognize, sir?
One of the things that these folks have told me is that you have to be very selective on which products that you purchase because you want to make sure that they come from a reputable manufacturer because of this whatever the word is you said, synthetic is what I've been calling it. I can't
synthesized.
Say it. Right, thank you.
May I?
Yes, you're right.
So with the lack of regulation in the state, there is no way for a consumer to walk into a store and understand what type of product they're buying outside of just like brand loyalty or that salesperson that store educating them. Without testing regulations on these products, anything in the manufacturing process that's residual, like harmful solvents or other contaminants, can make someone sick. So that is really where the danger is with the industry right now, because we don't have those regulations. Anything can be in these products on the shelf, and we agree that that's not safe and that's a consumer safety issue, but a very basic set of regulations would eliminate that.
Yes, sir, you're recognized.
Thank you. You also spoke earlier, or
one of you did about the pre-harvest standards, for 30 days before. Would that amount of THC in that pre-harvest standard, would that be different from that which we would find in a final product in a store?
Yeah, so it could be slightly different. So if I can try to explain the process real quickly. So they're going to test the Department of Agriculture for the compliance of 0.3% THC. Then they have 30 days to harvest. And during that last 30 days, the plant is going to naturally have a little bit more THC. But that little bit of THC extra, it's not ever going to get to a point where it's anything even resembling marijuana that we see. And there could be a little bit of variation. But the USDA knows that, and the TDA standards, they took that into consideration when they were making it. Does that kind of make sense?
Chairman Doggett, you recognize.
Thank you. So would it be safe to say that somewhere between that 30 days and the time that product got to market, that it could be, could be slightly more amount, or are we talking like large amounts of difference in the THC content?
I'd be happy to tackle that because we do a lot of compliance testing for not only Tennessee, but many states throughout the country. The 30-day harvest window was installed by the USDA to grant some variance to growers because the 0.3% standard is rather low. And so it created a little bit of a cushion to say, okay, it takes some time to get the test back, to send it off and get it back. Once you have it back, you have 30 days to harvest. And what it says is, for the purposes of compliance, we're going to use that harvest, we're going to use the test, we're going to use that report, understanding that cannabinoids may develop for some in the next 30 days. That development is relatively marginal.
Okay.
You recognize, sir.
Thank you. So I'm hearing that a lot of these products, when they're on the shelf, are considerably higher than that 0.3%. Can you speak to that as to if that's true and why that would be?
Well, the 0.3% federal standard that is referred to in the Farm Bill as well as the Controlled Substance Act pertains to Delta-9 THC, right? And so I think what we're contemplating are hemp-derived cannabinoids here that are not just Delta-9 THC. So any product on the shelf should absolutely meet that federal standard for Delta-9 THC.
Chairman Doggett, you recognize.
So with Delta, thank you. With Delta-8, cannabinoids and others, the 0.3 does not exist for that. So it's possible that you could have anything in excess of 1% or higher for Delta-8 cannabinoids?
Strictly speaking, yes, and that's because federal policy has sanctioned those higher concentrations.
Of Delta-9?
No, not of Delta-9. Not of Delta-9, of other hemp-derived cannabinoids.
Very good.
You recognize.
Thank you. What would happen to a user who, could someone expect if they were to use a Delta-8 cannabinoid that was very high in concentration of that particular THC? What would be the effect, or what can someone expect to happen to them?
Again, so there's no one answer to that question. Everyone metabolizes these various substances differently. I will say, just as a vast generalization here, you might equate Delta-8 to drinking a can of beer, whereas Delta-9 might be more akin to a 180 proof cocktail.
Interesting.
Chairman Doggett.
Thank you. Well, I've had several tell me that they've experienced different things by taking, these types of products. Is there a base overall average of what that level of THC might be in products? I mean, are we saying that generally they run between 0.6 and 1.0? Or are we talking they're in excess of 1.0? What's the...
Again, not a single answer to that question because of the various different ways that human beings metabolize these products. It's just, I wish I could be more enlightening. It's just impossible to answer that question.
Thank you. Final question, Mr.
You
Chairman.
recognize.
Would the, I know and I appreciate the industry is coming and asking for regulations because we want to make sure that, things that are packaged are done properly and not enticing to children and things like that. Would the industry be open to setting a cap or a limit on the amount that could be sold or for consumption?
Yes, we're certainly open to that conversation. And I also just want to say it's because you're talking about percentages, to be more accurate to consumer goods, it would be milligrams per serving. And so usually when people are having those results from when they've consumed the product, most often it was probably a lack in packaging that warned them and that had a milligram per dose per serving stated on the bag that allows them to kind of have a moment to say, let me think about this for a second. But yes, a milligram per serving would be appropriate for our industry.
Well, I will say this. I was told do not eat the entire pack of gummies.
That is very good advice.
Yes, they said do not eat the entire pack. That is
maybe eat half of the gummy instead
they
of the
said
entire pack.
one gummy and no more. So thank y'all very much for your time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Last on my list, I have Chairman Russell, if you're still.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
sir.
I was just curious of how sales in Tennessee compares to sales in states that are regulated.
Tennessee is doing really well. I don't have actual numbers in front of me, but we have a very large industry in Tennessee. Like I mentioned in my introduction, it's why I moved here. We have the best law for hemp in the country, and we've got a very strong business economy here around it.
Chairman Russell.
Is there any liability issues that y'all have to deal with by selling unregulated products?
I will say that for the hemp industry, and again, this is a very general statement, but risk management is absolutely a primary concern for the hemp industry. The risk management industry, the insurance industry, is rapidly trying to catch up with the development of the industry and offer us useful instruments that would help us manage our risk.
Chairman Russell, you recognize.
Can you get insurance for selling unregulated products?
For selling unregulated?
Yes, like Tennessee's not regulated at this time. Can you get liability insurance coverage for those products that you sell people?
Yes, because there is a level of regulation through the USDA law.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. We appreciate your testimony, and I know this has been very helpful. The leader and I have been kind of swapping comments offline, and I think consumer protections testing, safety standards is exactly what we're talking about here. Again, I want to remind the committee, we're not talking about legalizing or decriminalizing anything. These are products that are already perfectly legal. We need to figure out how we tell consumers what they are and make sure that there aren't bad actors lying to them. So thank you very much for being here today. And members, that concludes our presentation. So we will go back in session. We are back in session. And members, as a reminder, we do have a calendar in front of us. And so that brings us to item number 1, House Bill 2860 by Chairman Kumar, rolled 1 week. Next, that brings us to item number 2, House Bill 1214 by Chairman Ramsey. Chairman Ramsey, you've been waiting patiently. We appreciate you, sir. You have a motion and a second. You're recognized. I also see amendment coded 16556. Do you wish to move forward with that amendment?
Yes, sir.
Sir, you have a motion and a second.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I believe the amendment makes the bill, so we'll go ahead and vote to get that amendment on the bill. All those in favor of attaching amendment coded 16556 to House Bill 1214, please signify by saying aye. Those opposed, you adopt. Sir, you're on the bill as
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very interesting discussion that you've had here. Appreciate it. What this bill does is amended is keeps the current felony penalty for criminal exposure to HIV, but it eliminates the requirement that an offender be listed on the Violent Sexual Offender Registry and includes a process where those previously convicted will be able to apply for removal from the TBI on that listing. So with that pending questions, sir, I will ask to renew that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First on my list, I have Representative Campbell. You recognized?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to call the question
Oh,
unless
okay.
anybody has
Previous
anything.
question's been called. Without objection, we're ready to vote. All those in favor of sending House Bill 1214 as amended to calendar and rules, please signify by saying aye. Those opposed? Sir, you head to calendar and rules.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Item number 3, House Bill 222 by Chairman Powers, off notice. That brings us to item number 4, House Bill 2509 by Vice Chairman Grills. Sir, you're recognized. Sir, you have a motion and a second.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is a young man here that may want to say a few words, but that's up to y'all's discretion. He's been sitting here about the short barrels. Y'all been here a long time. But
If you want to just explain your
Sure,
bill, that'd
sure.
be great.
Today, the state law prohibits owning a short barrel rifle and a shotgun, which most people wouldn't believe. And the goal and the intent of this legislation is to bring some consistency to the code. Currently, a person can own a pistol that has a barrel shorter than 16 inches long, as long as the gun has the right brace or buffer tube on it. But if you take that same weapon and put a stock on it without changing the barrel, you're committing a crime. The function doesn't change, the caliber doesn't change, the only thing that changes is the way it's held against the body. And I know this bill probably doesn't change a lot, but there are people out here in our state that would appreciate the effort to support, if you'll support this legislation. And Austin is one of those young men that would appreciate it.
Members, you've heard the explanation of the bill. Any questions for the sponsor? Seeing none, we're ready to vote. Chairman Dixie, you recognize?
God, I forgot this wasn't even in front of me. Just without bringing him up, can you just give us a synopsis why it would mean so much to him in this bill?
Well, he has a handicap, and he has one arm. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, yes, sir. You're recognized. I apologize.
He has a handicap on his arm. He can only use his right arm, so the short barrel rifle being shorter gives him a better handling of that.
Chairman Dixie, any follow-up? Okay. Members, any further questions for the sponsor? Chairman Holsey, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to make sure I'm looking at it the right way, I understand the process of a fold-out handle going on a pistol. Now that's a rifle, and I understand it's got a short barrel, and that's fine. Does this apply then now to every rifle barrel that's out here?
Representative Grills.
Uh,
you
In other
recognize.
words, you can have one as short as you want.
Vice Chairman Grills.
Am I reading that right?
Yes, sir. Okay. According to state law.
Seeing no further questions, we're ready to vote. All those in favor of sending House Bill 2509 to calendar and rules, please signify by saying aye. Those opposed? Sir, you had to calendar and rules.
Thank you, committee.
Yes, sir. Thank you. That brings us to item number 5. Oh, and I apologize. If you wish to be recorded as a no, please let the clerk know that. That brings us to item number 5, House Bill 2583 by Vice Chairman Eldridge. Sir, you have a motion and a second. Thank you for waiting patiently. I do have an amendment coded 16905. Is that the one you wish to move forward on?
That is correct. Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
All right. You have a motion and a second. I believe that amendment makes the bill. So without objection, we will vote to put that on the bill. All those in favor of attaching amendment coded 16525 to House Bill 2780, please signify by saying aye. Those opposed, you adopt. Sir, if you could please explain your bill as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. This bill is making a couple of changes in code under Section 3915-401, subsection H. This is going to add a statement to that if you're it's about child abuse, and I try not to get too emotional with this one, but currently, you're looking at the child's health and welfare may include, but is not limited to, the natural effects of starvation or dehydration and acts of female genitalia mutilation. But this bill adds the statement, adverse effects on the emotional and mental health and welfare of the child. It also is making it a Class E felony for operating a daycare without a license or under a suspended license, or after the effective date of the denial or revocation of the license, and operating within 10 years of a previous finding by the department that a person or entity has operated a child care agency without being licensed by the department. And members, before the situation that happened in Hamlin County. A lady was operating a facility there with just a tremendous number of children there. 23 of these kids were under the age of 2, and they were strapped in the car seats, in their high chairs. The audio and video is constantly children crying. One lady has told me her child still rocks when they place him in his car seat because he's been trying to get out of that car seat while he was there. And what this bill does, and the sad part was this lady was not charged with anything. The DA couldn't prosecute her because there was no sign of physical abuse. So this places the mental aspect into the welfare of the child as well. And with that explanation, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for any questions.
Vice Chairman, thank you for bringing the bill. Very, very worthy effort. Question has been called. All those in favor of sending House Bill 2583 as amended to calendar and rules, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Sir, you had to calendar and rules. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, sir. You also have item number 6, House Bill 2780. Motion. Sir, you have a motion and a second, and I see amendment coded 16525. Is that the amendment you wish to move forward on?
525.
Yes, sir. 16525.
I'm showing 16212.
Give us just a moment to confirm.
Okay.
I'm being advised that the subcommittee amendment, so the amendment we adopted in subcommittee, is coded 16525.
Okay. I'm sorry, I do not have that copy in here, but.
You have a motion and a second, and it does rewrite the bill.
That is correct.
Okay, so without objection, let's get that amendment on the bill. All those in favor of attaching amendment coded 16525 to House Bill 2780, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, you adopt. And if you could please just explain your bill as amended.
Thank you, Chairman. This bill would allow court clerks, county clerks, registers of deeds, and the county trustees to enter into agreements with the fingerprint vendor that is currently under contract with TBI and offer the service of fingerprints for background checks permitted by law and processed by TBI. This would be on jobs like for attorneys, healthcare workers, educators, and professions that require state licensure. And this bill also would have TBI maintain, preserve, and enter this information into an automated fingerprint identification system as appropriate.
And members, just to clarify, that last piece there about the APHIS system is what the amendment did. So
that's correct.
Just
that's
to clarify
correct, Mr. Chairman.
All right, question's been called. Without objection, we're ready to vote. All those in favor of sending House Bill 2780 as amended to calendar and rules, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Sir, you had to calendar and rules.
Chairman, thank you, and thank you, committee.
Thank you, sir. Next up, item number 7, House Bill 630 by Representative Gillespie. Roll to the heel. That brings us to item number 8, House Bill 2754 by Representative Harris. Representative Harris, you are recognized. Sir, you have a motion and a second. I see amendment coded 16868. Why don't we hold those just for a second? Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yes, sir. Sir, you have amendment coded 16868. Do you wish to move forward on that amendment?
That's correct.
Motion. Sir, you have a motion and a second. If you could please explain your amendment.
So I just gave out some documents that will just kind of help understand how we got to where we are right now. So after working with the attorney as well as research analysts as well, we've come up with another piece of amendment as well to kind of address and put everything back in line with some of the requests of the committee members. And so I've provided some documents, and which I'll hopefully we'll get a chance to go over just in a second. But these documents basically show why I have brought this bill forward. Of course, the design was the main issue initially, And so this is how we've gotten to this piece here.
Okay. So members of the posture end, we have the amendment before us. We have a motion and a second on that. I do have someone on the list who wants to testify from the Department of Revenue. So since we're on that amendment, which makes the bill without objection, we're going to go out of session. And on my list, I have Logan Hess and Shelby Hurt from the Department of Revenue. I only see one person, so sir, if you could just, we've been talking about a lot of cannabis today, so I was a little, no. If you could just please introduce yourself for the
Yes,
record.
sir. Thank you,
and serve the
Chairman.
committee.
Committee Logan Hess, Legislative Director for the Department of Revenue. Last week, there was a good amount of discussion on this bill, and I just wanted to clarify one quick thing for the committee members. Originally, the bill dealt with the redesign of the temporary tag. I just wanted to let the members know that we already did redesign that tag. This past November, we began issuing those with watermarks and some other security features. I know there was a lot of questions about if we were going to do that, going to redesign those tags, but just wanted to clarify for the record that we have already done that, and that's kind of what led us to the posture that we're in now. And with that, I'll happily take any questions.
I've got a list growing here. Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We heard, and I think you were watching last week, we heard a presentation basically that tag applied for was something that people use apparently in other states. I can't find anywhere in the code where that's a valid tag in Tennessee. It might be an excuse that an officer takes it easy on you, maybe gives you a warning, but is tag applied for an appropriate temporary tag in Tennessee?
Sure, you're recognized.
Sir, off the top of my head, I'm not entirely sure. I know that when you get a temporary drive-out tag from a dealer, they can print off the new tags right there on the spot and give that to you, so you should be able to use just that one right there. But no, I do not believe that tag applied for is a valid tag.
Okay, thank you. And I couldn't find anywhere in the code where it said, hey, if you've applied for a tag, then you don't have to have one. It seems to indicate that it's either a temporary tag or the actual tag. I just couldn't find anything in there, and I was wondering if there was maybe something I'd missed. So.
No, sir, it's not. You would just have that only that temporary drive-out tag, not a tag applied for.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Next on my list, I have Chairman Howell. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hess, for being here. You've been working on this with the sponsor and with transportation as well for quite some time. The original code, I believe, that talks about the legal documents, registration, of the tags themselves, the titling, et cetera. In that code, I believe it mentions the word plate.
Yes, sir.
Now, would these temporary tags, according to your department of, and according to your legal counsel, does that cover the temporary tags as well?
Yes, sir. We believe it did, but we did recognize that it didn't specifically say temporary tag, but we did believe that it is a document given out that would be covered under that. Yes, sir.
To your knowledge,
you're recognized.
To your knowledge, has there been citations issued based on that part of the code where temporary tags were defaced based on that wording of plate?
Mr. Hess, you're recognized.
Yes, sir. There have been.
Chairman
Thank you,
Howell.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Next on my list, I have Representative Beck. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hess. I've noticed lately that the tags look like just a printed off 8 and 11 and a half piece of paper, and they put them on the back of the cars, and they're just waving, look like they're ready to fall off at any second. Is this the new tags?
No, sir.
Mr. Hess, you're recognized.
My apologies, Chairman. Yes, sir. It is a smaller white tag that will have the TriStar, or excuse me, the state seal on there as a watermark. If it's looking like it's about to fly off the car, I don't know if it needs to be secured further than that, but the new tag should be on there pretty easily.
Representative Beck, you're recognized.
Are they just printed off on regular copy paper?
No, sir, not regular copy paper. The actual material, I'm not certain, but it's not just copy paper.
Is it thick stock? Because
Yes, sir.
these look very flimsy.
Yes, sir. It should be a thicker stock.
Okay, thank you.
Next on my list, I have Chairman Doggett. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And going back to what my colleague just brought up with the that type of paper, it does look flimsy when you go down the road, but I can tell you that it's good, thick material. I just recently had one on a vehicle, and it's surprising what it is. My question is, we went back and forth for about 45 minutes the other day in this committee about the language on this. What the sponsor is seeking to do, from my understanding and research, we already do this in code now. Is this legislation in fact needed, or are we already being able to, are we already doing this, or are we just reinventing the wheel and adding this somewhere else in the code, is my question.
Mr. Hess, you recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, sir. To my point that I made a moment ago with Chairman Howell, we believe that currently it would be covered under code. I do know that this new amendment does change up a couple of things and adds it in a newer place in Title 55. But like I said, we did believe that currently it would be a felony.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Final question for Mr. Hess. So you've begun the redesign, and it's already covered in code. So it would seem, and I'm asking for your opinion, so it would seem the problem is not that we need a new tag, but that we need more enforcement. Would that be a proper analysis?
Mr. Hess.
Yes, sir. I believe so. The new tag is it is new this past November, so it's only a couple of months old. So still just newly getting out there. But I think the enforcement is more the issue. And my initial conversations with the sponsor was just to let him know that, hey, we did just redesign these plates. So, yeah, I would say that it's more of enforcement at the moment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Howell, any further? Okay. Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, good evening, sir. You said that, I believe your words was changes up a couple of things. What does his amended bill change up?
Mr. Hess.
Well, sir, the amendment, the newest amendment, it removes the part of the original bill that had us redesign the temporary tag. So that part has been removed. I think as originally written, the bill also made it a Class C misdemeanor. This amendment now makes it, or clarifies that it's a felony. So those are the changes that I was referring to from the original bill.
All right, so the Class C felony is an increase in the level?
No, sir, it's actually not an increase. We believe that it's already a felony to tamper with any plate or registration or document from the department or the government. So what this does is it just adds a temporary tag to those, specifically adds temporary tag to the list of documents that being falsified would be a felony.
Representative Hardaway.
Thank you. So the words temporary tag are not in that section of law now?
No, sir, I do not believe that they are.
And would you agree with me that the law needs to be simple enough that John Doe can pick up the book without hiring a lawyer and know what it says, what it means?
Mr. Hess.
Yes, sir. I mean, we definitely agree that there's some definite argument that could be made there, one side or the other. One, that yes, it would be currently a felony, or two, that since it doesn't specifically mention that it could be. So I know his amendment is just clarifying that and adding the words temporary tag in there.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Representative Hardaway. Seeing no further questions for our witness, thank you, sir, for your testimony. We'll go back in session.
Thanks, Chairman.
And I do have a list here as back in session. First is Chairman Howell. You recognized?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I mentioned in committee last time that I have a letter on my desk from a constituent who is now a felon because he took a magic marker and marked out the date on a temporary tag. So obviously law enforcement believes that it's covered under current code. Based on the testimony from Revenue, I would make a motion to move this to summer study.
Okay. We have a motion and properly second. Any discussion on that? 1 second. Seeing none, we're ready to vote. Representative Hardaway, you wish to object?
Yes, sir. On the summer study, and maybe I'm not clear on what it is we're going to study, because I thought the whole purpose in the amended version of the bill was just to bring clarity to the law. With the Chairman Howe's example, that the law enforcement recognize the offense. My position is that the citizen should have recognized that it was an offense, and I think that's where the sponsor's bill was going. So that's why I'm suggesting that that's my explanation on why I think we need to handle this bill in lieu of summer study. But I'm curious as to what the sponsor's position is, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, the parliamentary procedure we find ourselves in is we have a proper motion that's been properly seconded, and we are ready to vote on that motion to summer study. All those in favor of sending House Bill 2754 to summer study, please signify by saying aye. Those opposed? No. The ayes have it. Bill heads to summer study. That brings us to item number 9, House Bill 2211 by Chairman Russell. Chairman Russell, you're recognized.
You give me a motion.
Second. Sir, you have a motion and a second.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This just brings the TBI in compliance with the FBI in reference to background checks, and the Senate's already passed it 33-0.
Members, you've heard the explanation. Any questions for the sponsor? Seeing none, all those in favor of sending House Bill 2211 to calendar and rules, please signify by saying aye. Those opposed? Sir, you had to calendar and rules.
Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to item number 10, also by Chairman Russell, House Bill 2212. Sir, you have a motion and a second. I also see amendment coded 16621. Do you wish to move forward on that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
All right. We have amendment coded 16621. You have a motion and a second. And the amendment rewrites the bill. All those in favor of attaching amendment coded 11621 to House Bill 2212, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? You adopt. Members are on House Bill 2212 as amended. You recognize, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill seeks to clarify what essentially some judges across Tennessee are already doing by putting it in writing. This is simply an oversight that's not clearly defined in statute. This bill seeks to correct this problem by clarifying that judges has the authority to allow probation officers to issue a criminal summons to court instead of a warrant for a new arrest for violation of probation.
Members, you've heard the explanation. I have Chairman Doggett on my list. You recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just for clarification, probation officers, a judge can still issue a warrant for their arrest for violation of probation, but this gives an opportunity for the probation officer to request a summons in lieu of that arrest warrant.
Chairman Russell?
That is correct, and some judges are already doing it, and this came from some judges, law enforcement officers, and just ordinary people. They just want to make sure it's uniform, that it's clearly written so people can understand it across the state of Tennessee.
Chairman Doggett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could the judge, if the probation officer requests a summons, could the judge still say, no, I want an arrest warrant, I want these people picked up on this violation of probation charge, even though they were just arrested on a different charge the week before, which brought them into violation?
Chairman Russell.
Absolutely. It doesn't change anything that's currently being done. Judges has the sole authority to make that decision.
All right. Next on the list, I have Representative Hardaway. You recognized?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to the sponsor, are there guidelines in place, either through statute or policy, that would govern when it's appropriate for the probation officer to request a summons versus an arrest warrant?
Chairman Russell, you recognize?
So I never was a probation officer, but as a law enforcement officer, and I've had to arrest people for violation of probations. So I particularly can't tell you how a judge makes that decision or how a probation officer makes the decision whether to seek a warrant for violation of probation, but there is clearly no definition on how they can issue a summons or a warrant, and this corrects that.
Representative Hardaway.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the sponsor. I think we need to look at a whole lot of these offenses, not just these violations.
Thank you, sir.
That would be eligible for summons versus arrest.
Thank you, Representative Hardaway. Seeing no further questions, we're ready to vote. All those in favor of sending House Bill 2212 as amended to calendar and rules, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Sir, you had to calendar and rules. That brings us to item number 11, House Bill 2165 by Chairman Doggett. Chairman Doggett, you recognize you have a motion and a second. I see an amendment coded 16582. Do you wish to move forward with that amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Sir, you have a motion and a second on the amendment. Without objection, we're ready to vote. All those in favor of attaching amendment coded 16582 to House Bill 2165, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? You adopt. Sir, on your bill as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The bill is amended authorizes the Department of Correction to advance or reimburse witness expenses necessary to the prosecution of a criminal case upon request by District Attorney General and approved by the court. It also requires the Department of Correction to maintain advance payment as a receivable against the final cost bill attributed to the case in which the witness fees were advanced or reimbursed.
Members, you've heard the explanation of the bill as amended. Question's been called. Without objection, we're ready to vote. All those in favor of sending House Bill 2165 as amended to calendar and rules, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Sir, you had to calendar and rules.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Next on my list, I have Chairman Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, it's been a long afternoon. We've had a lot of good work done here, but I think I will make a motion to adjourn.
Motion's been made to adjourn. It's been seconded. We are adjourned. And I apologize, members. I should have mentioned all bills remaining on the calendar rolled to next week.